You are not too sensitive. You are perceiving data that most people are neurologically trained to ignore. The exhaustion you feel after being in crowded rooms is not weakness. The sudden sadness that appears in you without explanation is not instability. The anxiety that rises when someone smiles but feels hollow is not overthinking. It is signal detection. And because you were never taught how to interpret it, it feels like suffering instead of insight. For years, modern psychology called this hypersensitivity. Spiritual traditions called it empathy. Ancient mystics called it soul perception. Today, neuroscience is beginning to describe it as heightened mirror neuron activity and emotional contagion processing. But long before laboratories, Jungian depth psychology, Taoist mystics, and esoteric alchemists spoke about the porous boundary between psyches. Jung suggested that beneath the personal mind lies a collective psychic field, a shared unconscious. Quantum theorists describe entanglement, where separate particles behave as one system across distance. These ideas converge into a single implication: separation may not be as solid as it appears. In the next few minutes, your entire interpretation of empathic suffering will shift. What you experience is not imagined. It is a function of how deeply your nervous system reads the invisible layer of reality. And by the end of this video, you will understand not only why you feel others' pain, but how to stop being consumed by it. When you enter a space where something has happened, an argument, a silent resentment, a hidden disappointment, you often sense it before anyone speaks. Your body adjusts before your mind forms a thought. Your shoulders tighten, your stomach contracts slightly, your breathing changes rhythm. You might even feel a wave of sadness or agitation without understanding why. Later, someone confirms that there was tension in the room, and you realize your body already knew. Modern neuroscience gives us a partial explanation. The human brain contains mirror neuron systems that activate not only when we perform an action, but when we observe another person performing it. If someone nearby expresses grief, the neural networks associated with grief in your own brain begin to simulate that state. This mechanism evolved for social bonding and survival. It allows us to learn quickly, to cooperate, to understand intentions. In most individuals, this simulation remains subtle and regulated. The brain distinguishes clearly between me and you. In empaths, that distinction is softer. Research into emotional contagion shows that moods spread through groups with remarkable speed. One anxious individual can elevate the cortisol levels of an entire team. A calm, grounded person can lower collective stress without saying much at all. The nervous system is not isolated inside the skull. It constantly scans faces, tone of voice, micro-movements, pupil dilation, posture. It collects thousands of fragments of information per second and assembles them into an internal model of the emotional environment. Most people filter this data aggressively. Empaths do not. But if we stop at biology, we miss something profound. The scientific explanation describes the mechanism, yet it does not fully capture the lived experience of those who feel this deeply. There is a qualitative difference between noticing that someone is upset and feeling as if their emotional state has moved into your own body. Ancient traditions approached this phenomenon from a different angle. Taoist philosophy speaks of qi as a flowing life force that moves between beings. In Indian yogic systems, prana circulates not only within the individual, but through the relational field. Indigenous shamans describe sensing disturbances in the spirit of a tribe long before conflict erupts into visible form. Across cultures, there is a shared recognition that human beings participate in an energetic exchange that exceeds words. If consciousness is not confined to the brain, but emerges from relational interaction, then emotion is not sealed within individual skin. It behaves more like weather than property. You do not own humidity in the air. You experience it. Likewise, you do not always generate the emotional climate you are feeling. Sometimes you are responding to it. Jung proposed that beneath personal consciousness lies a collective unconscious, a shared psychic reservoir containing archetypes, instincts, and emotional patterns that belong to humanity as a whole. In a Jungian interpretation, what we experience as personal emotion may sometimes be activation of collective material. Grief, fear, rage, longing. These forces existed long before you were born. They move through generations. An empath may be someone whose psyche is particularly receptive to this movement. This receptivity can originate in temperament, but it is often intensified by environment. A child raised in unpredictable emotional conditions learns to monitor subtle shifts. If a caregiver's mood could determine safety, the child's nervous system adapted to detect the smallest cue. Over time, this hyperattunement becomes automatic. It is no longer a conscious strategy. It becomes the default mode of perception. As adults, these individuals walk into spaces and immediately begin mapping emotional terrain. They register inconsistencies between words and tone. They feel the strain beneath forced laughter. They sense resentment hidden under politeness. The brain does not label this process. It simply transmits the result as feeling. This is why an empath often says, "Something feels off," even when no evidence is visible. There is also a deeper layer to consider. In physics, the concept of resonance describes how systems vibrating at similar frequencies begin to synchronize. Two tuning forks placed near one another will eventually vibrate together if they share the same pitch. Living systems exhibit similar coherence. Heart rhythms can synchronize during conversation. Brain waves can align between people engaged in meaningful dialogue. The boundaries between organisms are not as absolute as we imagine. When your internal state is open and sensitive, you resonate more readily with surrounding states. If someone near you carries unresolved sorrow, your system may entrain to it. The experience feels personal because it is happening inside your body, yet its origin may not be. This challenges the cultural narrative of radical individualism. We are taught that emotions are private possessions, generated internally, and contained neatly within personal identity. Empaths often discover that this model does not match reality. Their experience suggests permeability, and permeability is misunderstood. A permeable psyche is not defective, it is relationally intelligent. It reads the subtle currents of human interaction. It perceives what is unsaid. It registers contradictions between appearance and essence. In healthy form, this capacity fosters profound compassion and insight. In untrained form, it leads to overwhelm. The difficulty is not in feeling, the difficulty lies in interpretation. When sadness enters you without context, the mind seeks explanation. It may conclude that you are depressed, unstable, or fragile. Yet the sadness may have been triggered by proximity to someone silently grieving. When irritability arises unexpectedly, you might blame your personality. But perhaps you absorb the agitation of a stressed colleague. Without a framework, the empath internalizes the external. Over time, this internalization accumulates. Layers of borrowed emotion mix with authentic personal experience until clarity blurs. You may struggle to distinguish your own desires from the expectations of those around you. Decisions become confusing because you are processing multiple emotional streams simultaneously. This is where the thematic core deepens. Empathy is not merely kindness, it is a mode of perception. To perceive deeply is to risk saturation. Yet it is also to access dimensions of human connection that others rarely touch. Empaths often form bonds quickly because they sense vulnerability beneath surface presentation. They intuit pain before it is confessed. They detect authenticity without needing evidence. The same nervous system that registers suffering also registers beauty with intensity. Music can move you to tears. A small act of generosity can feel immense. A sunset can produce awe that others barely notice. The sensitivity operates across the entire spectrum of experience. When viewed through this lens, the empath is not broken. The empath is attuned. Attunement requires calibration. Without it, the world becomes overwhelming noise. With it, the world becomes intelligible pattern. You are not given instructions for managing this architecture. Society values resilience defined as emotional detachment. But true resilience for an empath is not detachment. It is grounded awareness. It is the capacity to sense without absorbing, to witness without collapsing, to connect without dissolving. Understanding the architecture of the soul begins with acknowledging that your experience is not imaginary. It has biological roots, psychological history, and mystical echoes across civilizations. You stand at the intersection of neuroscience and ancient wisdom. And once you recognize that intersection, the narrative shifts from "why am I like this?" to "how do I work with this?" The mechanism that makes you absorb pain is not mystical exaggeration, and it is not fantasy. It is structure. It is conditioning. It is identity formation, operating beneath awareness. Most people believe empathy is simply caring, but what you experience goes beyond caring. It is immersion. It is as if the emotional boundary between you and another person becomes semi-transparent, and information flows through without permission. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the architecture of identity itself. The ego is not arrogance. It is a boundary-making function. It tells your nervous system where you end and where another begins. When that boundary is firm, external emotion registers as observation. When that boundary is flexible, external emotion can register as participation. A flexible boundary is not weakness. In many spiritual traditions, it is considered openness. The problem emerges when openness develops before stability. In early childhood, the brain does not possess a strong sense of separation. An infant does not know where their emotional world stops and the caregiver's begins. Gradually, through consistent safety and attunement, the child forms a coherent self. This is my feeling. That is yours. But if the environment is unpredictable, emotionally volatile, inconsistent, or subtly unsafe, the child adapts differently. Instead of building a rigid boundary, the nervous system becomes hyper-attentive to external states. It scans continuously. It learns that survival depends on anticipating emotional shifts before they fully manifest. Over years, this hyper-attunement crystallizes into identity. You do not simply notice others' emotions, you orient around them. This is where the mechanism deepens. The human brain is predictive. It constantly generates models of what will happen next. For a child in unstable conditions, the brain's predictive machinery focuses heavily on emotional forecasting. A slight tightening of a parent's jaw might signal incoming anger. A shift in tone might predict withdrawal. These microsignals become critical data points. As an adult, the same predictive system remains active. You detect micro-expressions and posture changes that most people overlook. Your nervous system completes the emotional pattern before the other person consciously admits what they feel. And because your body simulates that state internally, it feels like your own. Neuroscientists describe this as embodied simulation. When you see someone in pain, the pain matrix in your brain partially activates. When you witness fear, your amygdala responds. In empaths, these activations are amplified and less inhibited. The regulatory systems that would normally dampen the intensity are less dominant. But biology alone does not explain the full experience. Jung explored the idea that the psyche contains layers far deeper than personal biography. In a Jungian framework, shadow material, unacknowledged aspects of the personality, does not vanish. It moves into the unconscious and influences behavior indirectly. When individuals refuse to confront their own shadow, it seeks expression elsewhere. Empaths often become unconscious containers for this displaced material. When someone suppresses grief, it does not disappear. It leaks through posture, tone, silence. An empath senses that leakage. The body translates it into internal sensation. The mind, seeking coherence, interprets the sensation as self-generated. You are not absorbing emotion because you are spiritually superior. You are absorbing because your identity structure is relational rather than isolated. There is also a philosophical layer here that challenges the dominant cultural model of selfhood. Modern Western thought emphasizes individuality as separation. I think, therefore I am, positions consciousness as contained within a solitary thinker. But relational philosophies, from Taoism to certain interpretations of quantum theory, suggest that identity emerges through interaction. If identity is relational, then your sense of self is partially shaped by the emotional field around you. In this model, what you feel is not strictly internal or external. It is co-created in the space between. This intersubjective field is where empaths live most of the time. Your system is less interested in defending a fixed identity and more interested in maintaining connection. That connection sensitivity makes you porous. Porosity is double-edged. It allows intimacy, insight, and deep understanding. It also allows infiltration. Consider how often you have felt drained after being with someone who is chronically negative. They may not have expressed anything dramatic. They might have smiled, yet you left feeling heavy. That heaviness is the residue of prolonged resonance. Resonance is key here. In physics, when two oscillating systems interact, they influence each other's frequency. If one system is highly stable and coherent, it can stabilize the other. If one is chaotic, it can disrupt the other. Emotional systems function similarly. When you are grounded, you may calm others. When someone is internally turbulent, your system may mirror that turbulence. The more adaptable your nervous system, the more likely it is to synchronize. Without conscious differentiation, synchronization feels like absorption. There is another subtle mechanism operating beneath awareness: identification. When you sense pain in another, you may unconsciously attempt to resolve it. The body leans toward fixing, soothing, stabilizing. In doing so, you step partially into the emotional experience of the other person. You do not simply observe, you join. This joining blurs origin. Where does their emotion end and yours begin? Over time, if you repeatedly merge without recalibrating, you may experience identity diffusion. You might struggle to answer simple questions like, "What do I actually want?" because your internal compass has been oriented toward others for so long. Yet there is something extraordinary hidden within this structure. A rigid identity protects, but it limits depth. A flexible identity risks overwhelm, but it allows profound perception. The mechanism that makes you absorb pain is the same mechanism that allows you to understand people at levels they rarely articulate. You detect incongruence instantly. You sense authenticity without evidence. You recognize when someone is silently struggling, even if their words deny it. This is not imagination. It is pattern recognition operating at emotional frequency. The problem was never that you feel too much. The problem is that you were never taught how to separate perception from ownership. Once you understand that distinction, the mechanism becomes manageable. You can notice resonance without claiming it. You can acknowledge activation without internalizing it. You can remain connected without dissolving. But until that understanding solidifies, the experience will continue to feel like absorption. And that is why it has been so confusing. You were sensing accurately. You simply misinterpreted what sensing meant. The core insight that changes everything is this: you are not absorbing pain like a sponge. You are interpreting information from a shared emotional field. This distinction is subtle, but it reorganizes your entire understanding of yourself. When you believe you are absorbing pain, you imagine yourself as a passive object, porous, defenseless, overwhelmed by forces outside your control. A sponge has no agency. It simply soaks up whatever surrounds it. If that is the metaphor you live by, exhaustion feels inevitable. But if you are interpreting field data, you are not passive, you are perceptive. The difference between absorption and interpretation is the difference between drowning and decoding. Think about how the body responds to temperature. When you step into a cold environment, your skin registers it immediately. You do not assume the cold originated inside you. You understand it as environmental information. The sensation belongs to the interaction between you and the world, not exclusively to your identity. Emotional perception works in a similar way. When you walk into a room charged with resentment, your nervous system registers tension. Micro-expressions, posture rigidity, tone fluctuations, and subtle silences are processed faster than conscious thought. Within seconds, your body constructs an internal simulation of the emotional climate. Because the simulation happens inside you, it feels personal, but the origin is relational. The mistake empaths often make is collapsing simulation into ownership. If I feel this sadness, it must be mine. That assumption is understandable. After all, the sensation is in your chest, your throat, your stomach. But location does not equal origin. Your nervous system is a predictive modeling machine. It builds representations of external reality so you can respond appropriately. Emotional simulation is part of that modeling process. When someone nearby is grieving, your system recreates grief internally so you can understand and anticipate behavior. This recreation is not theft, it is translation. Jung's exploration of the collective unconscious gives this idea a deeper psychological dimension. In a Jungian framework, the psyche is not sealed. Archetypes and emotional complexes move through communities, cultures, and generations. When a society suppresses fear or denies trauma, that material does not disappear. It accumulates in the shared unconscious. Empaths are often those who sense the overflow. You might feel unease in environments where no immediate threat is visible. You might experience heaviness during historical anniversaries tied to collective tragedy. You may notice anxiety spikes during global crises, even if your personal circumstances remain stable. If the psyche has collective layers, then emotional fields exist beyond individual biography. From a neuroscience perspective, this aligns with studies on social baseline theory. The human brain evolved under the assumption of proximity to others. We regulate one another's nervous systems continuously. Heart rate, hormonal levels, even immune responses are influenced by social context. When someone near you is distressed, your body prepares as if you are partially responsible for stabilizing the environment. Cortisol rises, muscles tense, attention narrows. These shifts are not conscious decisions, they are automatic adaptations. In empaths, the regulatory threshold is lower. Activation happens quickly and intensely, but activation does not mean ownership. Here's where the profound shift occurs. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" ask, "What is my system perceiving?" This question moves you from self-judgment to observation. Observation introduces space. In that space, you begin to notice differences in texture. Personal emotion usually has narrative threads attached to it. It connects to memory, personal history, or specific thoughts. Borrowed emotional data often arrives abruptly, without storyline. It feels atmospheric rather than autobiographical. The distinction becomes clearer with practice. Imagine standing in a crowded subway. You suddenly feel agitation. Instead of concluding that you are unstable, you scan gently. The crowd is compressed. Someone nearby is arguing on the phone. Another person radiates frustration. The field is charged. Your nervous system mirrored the charge. Now imagine leaving the subway and stepping into open air. Within minutes, the agitation dissolves. If it were fundamentally yours, it would persist independent of environment. The rapid shift reveals relational origin. Understanding this does not require mystical belief, it requires attentiveness. Yet the mystical traditions anticipated this long ago. Taoist philosophy emphasizes harmony with the larger flow. When you are aligned internally, external turbulence does not dominate you. You sense it, but you do not merge with it. The sage feels the storm without becoming the storm. Jungian individuation similarly involves strengthening the center of the psyche. Individuation does not mean detachment from humanity. It means establishing a stable core that can engage with collective material without being consumed by it. The empath's challenge is not to close off perception. It is to cultivate a center strong enough to hold perception without collapse. Consider the metaphor of a radio receiver. A receiver picks up frequencies from the air. It does not generate the broadcast. It translates it into sound. If the receiver is poorly grounded, static overwhelms the signal. If it is well-tuned, clarity emerges. You are a receiver of emotional frequencies. Without grounding, you experience static as self. With grounding, you discern signal from noise. Grounding is not suppression. It is differentiation. Differentiation means recognizing, this sadness is present in my awareness, but it is not identical to my identity. That single sentence can prevent years of confusion. There is also a moral dimension hidden here. Many empaths unconsciously believe that feeling others' pain is virtuous only if they carry it. They equate self-sacrifice with compassion, but compassion does not require self-erasure. In fact, chronic self-erasure reduces your capacity to help. If you are overwhelmed, your nervous system remains in threat mode. In threat mode, empathy narrows into survival. True compassion arises from regulated awareness. When you stop internalizing external distress as personal flaw, your energy changes. Instead of spiraling into anxiety, you become curious. Instead of drowning in heaviness, you ask what the heaviness is signaling. This curiosity transforms suffering into information. Information can be used. You might choose to step away from chaotic environments more intentionally. You might recognize patterns in relationships where you repeatedly become the emotional container for others' unresolved issues. You might develop rituals that recalibrate your system after intense interaction. The insight is empowering because it restores agency. You are not cursed with excessive feeling. You are equipped with heightened perception. The skill becomes dangerous only when misunderstood. And here's the deeper layer still. If reality is fundamentally interconnected, as quantum entanglement metaphorically suggests, and as many mystical traditions assert, then your sensitivity is not anomaly. It is early awareness of a truth others are just beginning to intellectually grasp. We influence one another continuously, Thoughts alter posture. Posture alters mood. Mood shifts group dynamics. Group dynamics shape decisions that ripple outward into society. You are detecting those ripples in real time. When you misinterpret them as personal weakness, you suffer. When you interpret them as relational data, you awaken. This awakening does not eliminate feeling. It refines it. You begin to stand inside your own center while perceiving the emotional weather around you. You become less reactive and more observant. You can engage compassionately without merging. You can offer presence without surrendering stability. And slowly, the narrative that once haunted you, "I feel too much," transforms into something far more accurate. "I perceive deeply." That is not a flaw. That is capacity. And capacity, once understood, becomes power. You have likely spent much of your life questioning yourself. You may have thought that your sensitivity was a flaw, a quirk to hide, a liability in a world that prizes control and emotional distance. You may have tried to toughen up, telling yourself to stop overreacting, stop feeling so deeply, stop letting other people's energy get under your skin. Perhaps you were told you were too dramatic, too fragile, too emotional. You may have internalized those judgments, creating a quiet story that something was wrong with you. And yet, that story has never captured the truth of your experience. It has never explained why you can enter a room and feel the lingering tension before a word is spoken, why the sadness of a stranger can linger in your chest, why the world's collective suffering sometimes arrives in your body as if it were your own. You've been experiencing signals that the majority of people cannot even perceive. You've been walking through invisible currents, sensing what is hidden, decoding subtle patterns of human feeling that others cannot access. You are not broken. You are highly attuned. This attunement, however, comes with a cost. Without guidance, without understanding, it can feel like a curse. You may leave social gatherings depleted, emotionally raw, even physically exhausted. You may notice yourself carrying burdens that do not belong to you. Grief that is not yours, anger that is not yours, anxiety that is not yours. Relationships, even intimate ones, can feel overwhelming because you absorb more than most people even realize. And yet you continue to show up, continue to feel, continue to care, because the depth of your perception is inseparable from who you are. There is an invisible weight in feeling the world so intensely. Perhaps you've asked yourself, why am I always so drained? Why do I feel everyone else's pain, but no one seems to understand mine? This question is a bridge to understanding because it touches on the core paradox of the empathic experience. Your sensitivity is both the source of your suffering and the key to your strength. It is the lens through which you can see the truth of human experience, even when others are blind to it. Childhood experiences often shape this dynamic. If you grew up in a home where emotions were unpredictable or unspoken, where tension could escalate without explanation, your nervous system learned to monitor everything. Micro-expressions, tone shifts, subtle gestures, they became survival cues. You adapted. You became hyper-attuned. Over time, the skill that protected you in childhood became the mechanism that overwhelms you as an adult. You absorb signals without realizing you are absorbing them. You interpret the emotional field around you as part of your personal reality, even when it originates elsewhere. And yet, this is not your fault. It is a design feature of your nervous system, a deeply adaptive sensitivity that allows you to perceive the world differently. While most people filter emotions aggressively, you do not. You notice what others overlook. You register subtleties in human behavior that reveal truth beneath the surface. You sense inconsistencies, unspoken suffering, hidden tensions. You are built to detect resonance, to feel currents that others cannot name. But there is a cost when that resonance is not understood. Over time, absorbing too much of the emotional world without differentiation can erode your own sense of identity. You may struggle to know what you truly feel, what you truly want, and what belongs to you versus what belongs to others. You may unconsciously prioritize other people's emotional states over your own well-being. This is why many empaths feel exhausted by life despite outward success or apparent stability. The deep, intimate truth is this: your sensitivity is not a weakness. It is an extraordinary form of intelligence. It allows you to perceive reality at levels others cannot. You feel the unspoken, You sense the invisible. You understand the subtleties of human experience before words are even spoken. This is a rare capacity, one that can transform not only your life, but the lives of those around you, if you learn how to navigate it. Empaths often think they must shrink themselves to survive in a world that values detachment. But the key is not to shrink. It is to develop conscious boundaries that honor both your perception and your personal integrity. Grounding, discernment, and awareness are tools that allow you to remain deeply connected without being consumed. These practices do not diminish your capacity, they refine it. They allow you to stand in the world fully aware, fully attuned, yet centered in your own sense of self. You are not flawed because you feel too much. You are rare because you perceive too clearly. Your experience of pain, whether yours or borrowed from others, is a signal that you are deeply alive, deeply attuned, and uniquely capable of understanding the hidden layers of existence. When you learn to recognize and respect the difference between what belongs to you and what is flowing through you, empathy transforms from burden to power, from confusion to clarity, from exhaustion to insight. And so, the personal connection that defines your experience is not simply emotional, it is existential. You feel the world so intensely because your consciousness is attuned to layers of reality that are invisible to most. You are the observer, the translator, the bridge between the hidden currents and visible life. The depth of your perception is your gift. The challenge is learning how to honor it without losing yourself. When you begin to see your sensitivity not as a curse, but as a signal, a form of awareness, you step into a new level of existence. You understand that feeling is not liability, it is insight, it is guidance. It is the ability to navigate life with an extraordinary map of emotional and relational terrain. The world may not teach you how to handle this gift, but now you can recognize it, understand it, and begin to wield it consciously. The recognition is simple, yet profound. You are not fragile, you are attuned. You are not overwhelmed, you are informed. You are not absorbing indiscriminately, you are perceiving deeply. And in that perception lies the potential to transform your suffering into mastery, your sensitivity into wisdom, and your experience of life into a source of extraordinary power. The awakening begins not with dramatic gestures or sudden transformation, but with recognition. It begins with a single conscious observation. What I am feeling may not belong to me. These words are deceptively simple, but they carry the weight of freedom. They create a crack in the unconscious habit of internalizing everything around you, a crack through which clarity can seep. For empaths, clarity is the most radical act you can perform. It is the act of reclaiming your own energy without denying your sensitivity. You have been living in a world that often misunderstands your depth. Society rewards detachment, prioritizes emotional control, and calls subtle perception overreacting or drama. You may have spent decades attempting to conform, to dull your awareness, to close off channels that naturally allow you to sense, understand, and connect. But the very act of shutting down does not erase your sensitivity, it distorts it. What is denied internally only accumulates, waiting to emerge in unexpected ways, in stress, in exhaustion, in emotional collapse. The awakening begins when you stop resisting your nature and start engaging with it consciously. Start with observation. When an emotion arises, notice where it is in your body. Is it a tension in the chest? A knot in the stomach? A heaviness pressing on your shoulders? Pause mentally and ask yourself, is this my emotion, or is it coming from someone else? Personal emotions usually have threads, memories, narratives, connections to your lived experience. Borrowed emotional currents often arrive suddenly, without story, without context, without explanation. They feel like atmospheric pressure rather than the voice of your own mind. Learning to notice this difference is the first step toward mastery. Grounding is the next essential practice. You are not meant to live unanchored in the currents of collective emotion. Stand, walk, breathe, move your body with intention. Engage your senses fully in the physical world. Touch the floor, feel the texture of objects, listen to the sounds around you, taste the flavors of food deliberately. When you root yourself in the tangible, your nervous system calibrates. Grounding does not shut out perception. It allows your awareness to flow without destabilizing your center. Breath is another tool of awakening. Slow, deep, conscious breathing signals to your nervous system that you are safe, that you are present, that you are in control of your vessel. When external emotional waves surge through you, your breath becomes the anchor to your own interior landscape. It does not diminish your ability to perceive others, it strengthens it. It tells your body, I can witness this without merging. I can feel this without losing myself. Time alone is equally sacred. For empaths, solitude is not isolation. It is recalibration. In moments of quiet, you return to your own baseline. You reconnect with your own rhythms, your own preferences, your own unmediated experience. The world may expect constant availability, constant tuning, constant empathy, but your system requires recovery. Alone, you consolidate, integrate, and distinguish between what is yours and what is external. Beyond observation, grounding, and solitude, there is a subtler practice, conscious resonance. You are not only reading others, you are interacting with a field of consciousness. Imagine yourself as a translator or a skilled musician. You sense frequencies and patterns. You notice dissonance. You feel tension. You also have the power to stabilize, to harmonize, to hold presence without absorbing chaos. Your awareness becomes intentional. You learn to allow currents to pass through you without claiming them as your own. In Jungian individuation, this is the ultimate goal: to engage fully with the unconscious, both your own and that which flows around you, while maintaining the integrity of yourself. You become a conscious node within the network of human connection, neither collapsing into it nor shutting it out. Your sensitivity transforms into discernment. Your intuition becomes precise. Your compassion becomes sustainable. And then there's the profound shift in perspective. Understanding that feeling does not require self-erasure. You no longer equate perception with responsibility for repair. Witnessing suffering does not obligate you to carry it. You can be present, offer support, or simply acknowledge, all while remaining anchored in your own experience. This is not detachment. It is mastery of the empathic skill set. Through these practices, the awakening gradually unfolds. It begins with recognition, moves into grounding, extends into conscious differentiation, and matures as integration. You begin to experience empathy as a gift rather than a burden. You begin to navigate relationships, environments, and collective currents with intentionality and grace. You no longer react unconsciously. You respond wisely. You no longer feel lost within waves of emotion. You observe, understand, and choose. This is the mystical path of the empath: to transform sensitivity into clarity, to convert depth into insight, to wield the very mechanisms that once caused overwhelm as tools for awareness and guidance. The awakening is subtle, persistent, and cumulative. It does not demand sudden revelation. It requires attention, practice, and patience. But when it is realized, it transforms the empath from a passive receiver of emotion into a conscious navigator of human experience. A being capable of perceiving the hidden currents of reality while remaining rooted in the sovereignty of self. And in this state, you realize a truth that resonates at every level. You are not defined by the emotions that flow through you. You are defined by your capacity to perceive, integrate, and respond. You are not overwhelmed by the world's pain. You are aware of it, capable of understanding it, and free to act with clarity. Your awakening is not a single moment. It is an unfolding. It is a journey into conscious empathy, where perception is mastery and depth becomes power. You were never imagining it. The heaviness that sometimes arrives without warning, the sadness that lingers after someone else has left the room, the subtle tension that presses against your chest without a word being spoken, these sensations were never evidence of fragility. They were signals. They were information. They were markers of perception, of attunement, of resonance. What you felt so intensely, what you carried so personally, was never solely yours to own. It was a reflection of a world that moves in invisible currents, a world you are uniquely equipped to sense. For much of your life, you may have felt isolated, as though the depth of your perception separated you from others. Crowds exhausted you. Relationships sometimes overwhelmed you. The suffering of the world seemed to press into your body with disproportionate weight. You may have doubted yourself, thinking that no one else could understand the intensity of what you experienced. Yet, that very sensitivity is your gift, and the gift has always been there, waiting for recognition. Across cultures and across centuries, mystics and philosophers, shamans and Jungian psychologists alike have described a reality that transcends personal perception. They spoke of layers of consciousness, invisible threads connecting all beings, archetypal patterns flowing through generations, emotional currents that defy isolation. Science has only recently begun to glimpse these truths through mirror neurons, social coherence, and the subtle resonance of living systems. What you feel is not a malfunction of your nervous system. It is evidence that you are aligned with a reality that most people cannot yet perceive. You are not a passive receptor. You are a translator. You are a navigator. You are a conscious participant in a network of human experience. Each feeling that enters your awareness is a piece of information, a wave in a vast ocean of interconnection. When you learn to observe it without claiming it as your own, when you learn to distinguish between resonance and ownership, you reclaim your agency. You are free to engage without collapse, to connect without erasure, to care without losing yourself. This awareness transforms perception into wisdom. What once felt like burden becomes guidance. What once felt like vulnerability becomes strength. The world does not overwhelm you. The world speaks to you through its subtleties, through its unspoken truths, through its invisible currents. And you are capable of hearing, understanding, and responding with clarity. And yet, even as clarity emerges, there is still mystery. Not all currents are visible. Not all signals are understandable. There are dimensions of consciousness, of collective experience, of emotional resonance that remain beyond words, beyond intellect, beyond analysis. You are privileged to sense these layers, to live at their intersection, to carry knowledge that is both profound and subtle. In this recognition lies freedom. You no longer need to prove your sensitivity. You no longer need to apologize for your depth. You no longer need to shrink to survive. Instead, you stand in the center of your own being, attuned to the hidden architecture of emotion, aware of the currents that move around you, grounded in your own self, and empowered by the understanding that your experience of the world is not accidental. It is intentional. You are a witness to what others cannot yet see. You are a bridge between the visible and the invisible, the spoken and the unspoken, the conscious and the unconscious. And in being this bridge, you do not collapse. You do not disappear. You illuminate. You translate. You hold presence where most would falter. The world may continue to move unpredictably. People will continue to project, to suppress, to carry hidden pain. But you are no longer swept away. You perceive. You understand. You navigate. You carry the gift of sensitivity without losing yourself, the gift of perception without carrying the weight of ownership. You have arrived at a place where empathy is mastery, where connection is intentional, and where depth is both sustainable and transformative. And as you stand there, fully present in your own center, fully attuned to the subtle movements of life around you, you recognize something extraordinary. The world is not something to survive. It is something to perceive, to understand, to witness, and to navigate with clarity. You are capable of this because you were born to feel, born to sense, born to perceive what others cannot. You are not fragile. You are not broken. You are rare, extraordinary, and attuned to the hidden dimensions of existence. You have always carried this knowledge within you. Now you simply see it, honor it, and step into it consciously. And in that stepping, a transformation occurs. What once felt like overwhelming intensity becomes insight. What once felt like chaos becomes guidance. And what once felt like suffering becomes the source of profound understanding. You were never imagining it. You were always equipped to perceive the unseen, to feel the unspoken, and to navigate the invisible currents of life. And now, you do so with awareness, with agency, and with the quiet power that comes from truly knowing your own depth.